Okay, here we go. Hey, Wildcats. My name is Susan Entz. I am a fellow Wildcat, a proud Wildcat, and I am the Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations. It is truly my pleasure to introduce you to Ted Eynon. Ted Eynon received his business degree from UNH in 1985. He comes from a true Wildcat legacy family. A fun fact is that Ted's family sings the alma mater at every family gathering, and they know all the words without looking. Growing up outside of Boston, Ted spent a good bit of time skiing and backpacking in the New Hampshire White Mountains. Ted moved to Colorado in 2000 and spent some time in the software industry in various sales, marketing, and management roles before his love of skiing beckoned him into the ski industry in 2010. Ted is currently the owner and CEO of Meier Skis, a US ski and snowboard manufacturer and brand based in Denver, Colorado. He refers to his business as craft skiery. As some of you may know, UNH is one of only 9 schools worldwide to ever earn the advancement of sustainability in higher education STARS Platinum rating. So it is befitting that Ted owns and operates Meier as the world's most eco-friendly manufacturer of high-performance skis. Like Ted, Dr. Elizabeth Burakowski also grew up skiing in New England. She frequented Pat's Peak and a little gem of a mountain in Manchester known as McIntyre. Elizabeth is a research assistant professor at the University of New Hampshire in the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space. Liz earned her BA in geology from Wellesley College in 2003 and began working at UNH in spring 2005 as an outreach coordinator for the AirMap project at the Institute for Earth, Oceans, and Space. She completed her master's in earth science in spring 2007, studying past changes in winter climate in the northeastern United States. Dr. Burakowski returned to UNH in 2009 and completed her PhD in earth and environmental science in the interdisciplinary natural resources and earth system science program in 2013. Liz spent 2014 to 2016 completing a postdoc at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, just up the road from Ted, before returning to UNH as a research assistant professor. Liz is also an affiliate professor in the Department of Earth Sciences, where she teaches global environmental change and paleoclimatology. While not teaching or researching, Liz enjoys backcountry splitboarding. Do you all know what that is? Canoeing, surfing, and playing cribbage. I actually had to ask Liz. Splitboarding is snowboarding that is split, and then you can climb up the mountain with your snowboard. Is that right, Liz?
Yes, it's you can skin up the mountain and then you put it back together and then you get to snowboard back down.
It's great. Well, it is my pleasure to turn this over to Liz. And my question is, Liz, can you talk a little bit about your research and especially its impact on the ski industry in New England and beyond? Thank you.
All right, I will get us started here. Thank you so much from that excellent introduction. Let me just redo that real quickly. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I've been snowboarding for I think 25 years now. This might be my 25th year. I should really keep track. And part of my adventure in snowboarding has been that I get to do science while I'm doing it. So this is actually a picture from the Kahiltna Glacier in Denali National Park in 2013, where we were drilling an ice core as part of our research in Alaska to figure out what was going on with winters there. I won't be talking about that research so much today. We're going to talk more about what's happening in the northeastern United States. So let's start kind of at the beginning. This is where I learned to ski at Suicide 6 in Vermont. We had moved from Wisconsin to New Hampshire, so I got here about when I was 8 years old. And Suicide 6 holds a special place in my heart. It's where I learned to ski, one, and I haven't yet been back with my children yet, but we hope to at some point, probably post-COVID times when traveling is safer. The last time I was there, though, actually wasn't even for skiing. It was for a half marathon. And that's part of the adaptation strategy that a lot of resorts have been pulling into their marketing and their business model, is just to become much more year-round resilient. Suicide 6 is still operating today. They're fantastic and I love them. But unfortunately, 600 plus other ski resorts across the United States have closed since around the 1950s. Many of them are smaller resorts, tiny little one ski tow type of places, mom and pop owned. And they simply couldn't compete with like the larger resorts that had snowmaking and better liability insurance, and were just much more resilient to warm winters. This one pictured here is Maple Valley. It's in southern Vermont, it's lower elevation, and they simply couldn't keep up. And they recently sold, I think it was like a year or two ago, for about, I think it was $750,000. And they're not reopening as a ski resort. Instead, they're being reinvented as a brewery. Now, underlying a lot of these changes and these closures was some changes in winter climate that started around the 1970s. And we're going to visualize that real quick using a map. This is a NASA scientific visualization studio that shows changes in temperature across the world from 1880, and this one goes to 2018. So anywhere you're seeing blues, that means it was cooler than average. Anywhere you're seeing reds and orange, that means it's warmer than average. So let's see this play out over time. You can see in the 1800s into the early 1900s, things are very blue. It was cooler than average. As we get into the 1930s, you're going to see the United States light up in red, whoop, just like that. That was the Dust Bowl, period of warmth and dryness. As we get into the 1960s, the eastern US is blue. That's because we had a lot of coal-fired power plants that were emitting aerosols that were blocking the sun. The Clean Air Act cleaned that up, and now we see a different pattern emerge. Now we see the Arctic regions warming at an alarming rate, which is interesting. There's not much industry up there. They're not emitting a lot of CO2, but global atmospheric patterns are moving the pollution around Earth, leading to these uneven warming patterns. There's also a little bit that has to do with the loss of Arctic sea ice, which is really bright and white and helps to keep the Arctic cool. When we start melting that, we also see changes in the change in temperature up there, and that accelerates it. So this is worrisome, especially for us. The Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on Earth. We're right there. We're kind of in the center of action. Underneath all of these warming temperature trends are increases in greenhouse gas called carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, they've been measuring at the Mauna Loa Observatory. So this is far removed from pollution sources. It also gets a good distribution of carbon dioxide representative of non-pollution sources in the Northern Hemisphere. When I started skiing in the late 80s, carbon dioxide was at 350 parts per million. That means for a million parts of air in the atmosphere, 351 of those parts were carbon dioxide. So it's a tiny fraction of our atmosphere. But it packs a huge punch. Without carbon dioxide, we'd be an ice planet. We need it. But unfortunately, we're seeing too much. Now, when I started snowboarding at Pat's Peak, we were up to 360 parts per million. When I got to graduate school at University of New Hampshire, the number I had to remember for my exams was 380 parts per million. And today, now I'm teaching in the Department of Earth Sciences, my students for their first exam, this is kind of a cheat question if they're online, they need to memorize 415 parts per million. And I have to update this every single year because it keeps going up. So how's this related to winter? Well, in winter, we're seeing some interesting patterns in the United States. Over the past 40 years or so, we've seen hotspots emerge. New England and the Northeast has warmed up to 7 degrees since the 1970s. Places in the Midwest, similar pattern. When you look around the mid-Atlantic states, so my parents grew up in New Jersey. They actually went ice fishing there when they were in the back in the 70s and 60s. And today, this part of the world has now crossed a critical threshold. They are no longer seeing winter temperatures on average that are below freezing. Instead, their winter temperatures on average are above freezing. That means more of their winter precipitation falls as rain instead of snow. Ice on lakes is becoming much more rare and much less safe. And skiing is also becoming problematic. If I were to tell you, Pennsylvania currently has more skier visits than New Hampshire, would you be surprised? They actually have several million more than us. And that's because they get a lot of folks that are day trippers from the New York metropolitan area that are traveling to the Poconos to go skiing. So in the future, will they have to keep going further north to chase the snow? Well, it's like a multi-billion-dollar question, for real. Over a much longer term period, remember this one was in 1970, we've conducted research with the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, looking across the entire what they call northern forest. So that covers that region from the Northeast all the way out to the Midwest. And what we found was really alarming. We have changes in our winter climate that are affecting our ecosystems. They're affecting skiing and skiing and snow sports. They're also affecting indigenous populations and, unfortunately, ticks. Yeah. I won't talk too much about ticks because they're my least favorite insect. But what I do want to do is highlight some key things here. One of our key findings is that we're losing cold. So there's fewer days that are below freezing. We're seeing less frequent extreme cold outbreaks. So think of temperatures that are well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are becoming rare. We're also losing snow. There are fewer days with snow cover. In the Northeast and New England, we see about 3 weeks less winter of snow in the Northeastern United States than we did 100 years ago. That's almost a whole month. We also see that our winters are getting shorter. So there's a sustained cold period that is getting eaten away at, and it's mostly due to an earlier arrival of spring. This is very concerning, and you can take a closer look at the report that's up at Hubbard Brook. If you just Google "confronting our changing winters," it should pop up. I can also send it to UNH alumni, and they can send it out to you later as well. But it's a very important part of our ecosystem and our culture in New England. When we lose snow, we're losing a part of New Hampshire. So I also want to clarify some things too. I'm a scientist, I teach. I need to make sure that everyone's on the same page. We're having an amazing snow winter now. January was not so great. December also not so great, right? If you were in New Hampshire, we were seeing temperatures that were 6 degrees above average for January and December, which is crazy, except that they didn't even crack the top 10. And that's how little snow we had gotten as well. Colorado, I also heard from Ted, was also not having a great January. They've also finally gotten snow. So I think Mark Twain says it best: climate is what we expect and weather is what you get. You have your ups and downs, but what matters is the long-term, so decades or longer, trends in what we're seeing on the ground. We can see what's happening with climate from historical perspectives, like I just showed you, and then we can also take a look at what's happening in the future. And these are what we call climate projections. It's not a crystal ball, it's not a weather forecast. It's an assumption of what can happen in the future based on the laws of physics and based on what human behavior does. So a climate model, really quickly, I use these in my research. This is actually what I did a lot at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, was learning how to use these. And they essentially just divide the world up into grid cells that are both representing the atmosphere in different layers and the ocean in different layers and the land surface as well. And we use physical equations to represent the flux or flow of energy, water, carbon through this our Earth system. We also have to make assumptions for future projections about what humans are going to do. One of the things that we use are what are called scenarios. So we make some assumptions about what's going to happen to, say, carbon emissions. In a most optimistic scenario, the Paris Agreement scenario is what I like to call it, we pretty much cap out on our emissions almost within the next decade or two and then immediately drop down. And that means that we'll start seeing pretty much zero emissions by 2100. The temperature response in response to that means that we'll see our warming limited to about 2.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So about where we're at now, maybe a little bit warmer. So we could preserve winter, right? We're having winter right now. We also have some other scenarios, some that are a little less optimistic. This one's kind of a middle of the road or lower scenario. Things cap out with carbon emissions around 2050, drop, and then stabilize right around 5 gigatons of carbon per year. So substantially lower than what we had seen before, but roughly around like 1970 levels. When we go into the temperature record for projections into 2100, remember these are global temperatures, our warming was probably around 4 degrees warmer than today. So we would see more warming coming down the pipeline. The one that keeps me up at night, though, is this highest scenario. This is if we do nothing. This is if we keep burning fossil fuels. This is if we don't embrace energy efficiency and sustainability in our business practices. This means that global temperatures could be upwards of 7, almost 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they are today. And we haven't seen warming like that in millions of years. The last time this happened was probably about 3 million years ago, and we had temperate forests growing where Canada is today. They didn't have winter like we know it now. So quick question to all y'all in the audience, which scenario do you think we're currently following? And you can just think about it, discuss it if you're watching with someone else. Which one do you think we're following? I think it's pretty clear we're not following the Paris Agreement. And unfortunately, the one we are following right now is that highest scenario. So what can we expect to see for winter if we were to keep doing these scenarios? Let's take a look at the lower and the highest. Right now, we don't have any inkling that we're going to follow Paris Agreement. So I'll see what happens with winter using lower and higher scenarios. So these are climate model projections that I'm going to show you. This is the historical baseline. So the date of snow disappearance, for example. When we look at New Hampshire and this whole region of the Northeast, anywhere you're seeing these darker blues, that means that snow is disappearing probably around March or February, right? And anywhere you're seeing these higher values, you're skiing tucks in the spring, right? There's still snow in May. You could definitely ski up there. What happens in the future? Well, under that lower scenario, our snow disappears by March 29th, averaged across the region. For a place like coastal New Hampshire, we're looking at snow disappearance in like early March. Under that higher scenario, this is problematic. Now this means that snow is disappearing by March 19th. Remember, we started at a baseline of like mid-April. So this is a whole month left of winter by 2100. If I were to be still snow sampling in the seacoast, New Hampshire, I'm pretty much out of a job. There won't be any snow to sample. That's why it's all gray right there. And this is concerning, not just for me, but for any of the ecosystems that are down here. Remember, I talked about Pennsylvania as well. For societies, in terms of winter climate, I don't think there's going to be many ski resorts if we continue on this pathway in Pennsylvania. Places like upstate New York, they'll probably be okay. White Mountains, they'll be resilient, which is good. But anywhere further south than that, they're going to have a hard time staying open. So fewer skier visits are one impact of this. We're unsure about the demand for the sport, right? Will people continue to want to learn how to ski if they live in a place where it's actually really hard to do that, or there's only a few weeks a year that they can do it? Will we see a market shift? Will people from Pennsylvania make their way up to New Hampshire? We don't know. And it's hard to model it because, again, it's based on human behavior. So we wrote some reports on this, basically looking at just the historical baselines. I recommend checking out the more recent one of 2018 that we published with Protect Our Winters. We were looking at a snapshot of the 2015-16 ski industry. And when you look at the number of jobs supported across the United States, it's quite a lot. You can add these all up and it's almost 200,000 jobs. In a place like New Hampshire, it's not quite as many as a place like Colorado, where they have 43,000 jobs supported by this. But in New Hampshire, remember, this was a bad year. I don't know if you all remember 2015-16, but that was like one of the worst snow years I'd seen in a long time. 2012 also stands out. So you could probably inflate that by a good like 25 or 30% if you're thinking of a good year. It's maybe 7,000 to 2,000. When you look at the economic activity, so think of this as the amount of money that's just circulating in the economy due to the ski industry, we're looking at $300 to $400 million in the state of New Hampshire. And there's some regional pockets as well. A place like the North Country, where they have about 50% of their visitor spending coming from the ski industry. When they have a bad year, they feel the hit. It's not a fun year. We can also compare this across the United States and say, like, what does a good snowy winter look like relative to this long-term average? And keep in mind, this is well within the era of snowmaking, right? Snowmaking's been around since the 70s. And 2001 to 2016 was a pretty good baseline to have snowmaking as an adaptation strategy. When we look at our top 5 years, $692 million extra circulating in our ski economy and 11,800 more jobs. When we look at the bottom 5 years, billion less dollars circulating around, 17,400 fewer jobs. This is concerning. You'll note that it's not equal and opposite, right? Most of the time when you have a really good year, your resorts reach capacity. They can only move so many people up and down the mountain. Parking lots get full. But during a bad year, things can really fall apart. In some places, they might not even be able to open. And that happened in a resort in Oregon, I believe it was in 2014, where they simply couldn't even make snow to open up. Now, part of my job is also interdisciplinary. I mentioned I was in the NRES interdisciplinary PhD program. And some of the work I've been doing recently has been with sociologists. And we wanted to ask winter sports enthusiasts, do they recognize the warming? I had hypothesized that maybe they would. They spend so much time outdoors, right? If you're a snowmobiler, an ice fisher, person who likes to go skiing, Maybe you've noticed some changes over your lifetime. Well, the sociologist I was working with said like, that's a great hypothesis, Liz, but yeah, probably not so much. And he was right. I mean, it's Larry Hamilton. He actually took this photo behind me. He's a brilliant scientist and brilliant statistician. And what we found was basically that fewer than half of New Hampshire survey respondents were even aware that winter temperatures were on the rise. Fewer than half. The awareness of winter warming had nothing to do with their participation in winter sports. And it actually didn't make any difference how old they were, what their sex was, or how much education they had. Their awareness instead was tied to their political identity. And Larry predicted this. He's like, I guarantee it's going to do this. And he's been studying this for decades. What we found was that liberals and moderates were much more likely than conservatives to be aware or even acknowledge the warming trend. And this is concerning, but it's also, to me, I see it as an opportunity. When folks don't trust science, when they don't trust experts, it's usually because their policies that we need to use to address climate change are just at odds with their values. Sometimes they're religious values, they're spiritual values, sometimes they're political values, but we share a common interest. Winter recreation, our love of winter, the cultural surroundings of winter in New Hampshire. And I think that's something that we can all bond on and find solutions to preserve it for not just ourselves, but for our children and future generations. And that's what a lot of the work that I've been doing with Protect Our Winters. This is a nonprofit based out of Boulder, Colorado. It was founded by a professional snowboarder, Jeremy Jones. This is us up in Alaska when we were drilling that ice core. And it's his mission to rally the winter sports community around the climate change problem by talking about it and by getting political. This is a key point. When we go to DC and we talk to people who are in charge of these policies, one thing that gets them thinking is money. When they see that $300 to $400 million is on the line in New Hampshire, they listen. When they see that 43,000 jobs are supported in Colorado, they listen, especially when you look at the broader outdoor recreation community. In Colorado, there are more jobs that are supported by outdoor recreation than there are from the extractive industries like oil, gas, and mineral extraction. It's a huge economic driver. Resorts are also reducing their emissions. They're walking the walk. They have to. Breckenridge, shown here, has committed to renewable and 100% renewable by 2025, joining a number of other ski resort towns like Salt Lake City, Aspen, Colorado, Truckee, California, and Burlington, Vermont. New Hampshire actually has 5 towns also committed to 100% renewable. Any guesses as to what they are? Think about it for a minute and I'll tell you. Well, they are Concord, New Hampshire, Hanover, New Hampshire, Plainfield, Cornish, and Keene. Where's North Conway? North Conway is the birthplace of ice climbing. North Conway is a hub of New Hampshire skiing. Everyone knows North Conway, right? Whoever is in North Conway ought to be saying to themselves, why aren't we on this list? Why aren't we committed to 100% renewable? I also want to end with just what can you do? I don't want you to feel powerless to these changes. There's a lot you can do. And the first thing you're doing right now, you're talking about climate change. And to hear more about this, I want to pivot to Ted because he's also doing a lot about this problem. And so with that, let's hear from Ted.
There we go. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was a great presentation. Yeah, snow is obviously very important to those of us that are snow enthusiasts that like to be in the outdoors in the wintertime, skiing, snowboarding, splitboarding, snowshoeing, Nordic skiing. Snow is very important to the active outdoor lifestyle industry. Without snow, we'd have a difficult time recreating in the snow, in the mountains, which so many of us have a big passion for. And even as a little kid or while at UNH, whenever a snowstorm would roll in, always excited in advance of the snow and want to see that first snowflake fall. And and then peer outside the window in the middle of the night, see how much snow is falling, and hopefully you have a huge amount of snow in the morning, and off you go skiing. So snow is important to the outdoor industry, and so we're always excited for more snow. And there's no question. Elizabeth showed some real data as it relates to the economics. There's no question that when we have good snow, we all of us in the ski industry have a better year. There's no question financially. There's a direct correlation, which is why in the summertime, we don't sell typically a ton of skis in the summertime. Well, there's not much snow out there unless you're climbing up high or finding a glacier. There are people that find a way to ski every month of the year, ski year round, but it's a lot of effort to do that. So at Meier, when we started back in 2010, early on, Matt Cudmore, who founded Meier and started it, the first skis that were made using locally harvested wood. So pine beetle kill, and funny enough, pine beetle kill that's very predominant out here in the Rockies is a byproduct of overgrown forests, and there's a beetle that essentially, when the forest at a certain altitude and certain trees becomes, the forest becomes unhealthy, and it becomes overgrown, and ultimately the beetle can infest these forests. And for those that have been out here skiing, you can see devastation on the sides of the mountains. I mean, completely brown, with hardly any trees that are alive. So what's interesting is to make the beetle go away, it actually, to run its course, it requires extremely cold temperature for an extended period of time. And since we don't have quite as much of that as we once did, it's allowed the pine beetle to thrive. And there's various types of beetles, and different types of beetles attack different types of species. But we decided that we would try and incorporate some of that wood, which when it's harvested at a certain point in time, is wood that can actually be graded and used even in framing of homes. So we use a little bit of that wood in every ski we make. And that kind of set us on the path to, we say, striving to be the world's most eco-friendly, high-performance ski. So we try and take tangible, meaningful steps to make a more sustainable ski. Essentially, building skis, producing skis, manufacturing skis is not an environmentally friendly process. I mean, many things that are manufactured are not an environmentally friendly process. So what we try and do are instead of just talking about it, is to take some actual meaningful steps that allow us to make a bit more sustainable ski, and improve upon that each and every year, and find new materials, new techniques, new packaging, new ways to do that. So I'm going to cover a few of the things we do, and I think it's important to know that I think this industry, the active outdoor lifestyle industry, the recreation industry, they need all four seasons. We need snow, and it's important to us. And I think our industry is more recently waking up to the fact that just talking about it isn't good enough, and that we need to take measured steps. And I think the larger brands are challenged to find new ways, meaningful ways, to make meaningful improvements in their efficiencies and to make more eco-friendly products. Some of the things we've done here, starting with the wood core, every good ski in the world, anyone that's in the Olympics skiing, is in X Games or the Dew Tour, all of their skis and snowboards have a wood core. That's the heart and soul of every ski. So we use, as much as we can, locally harvested wood from the Rockies. Although as we grow, we're having to find sources outside of the Rockies as well. But the closer that production can be to the source of materials, the better. So as best we're able to, we try and source materials from North America and United States and Colorado where possible. The wood we use, the pine beetle killer I mentioned, it's also popularly known as blue stain, and it leaves this beautiful wood. We only use a little bit of it, a couple of stringers in every pair of skis. We also use aspen. Aspen is kind of one common root system, one continuous organism in the ground. Whenever you cut down an aspen tree, you get 10 to 12 shoots grow up from that. The problem is in Colorado, there's only one mill that's milling aspen because it has to be done at high altitude for a number of reasons. So it's getting a little harder to source the aspen. So we're looking at other fast growing trees here in the United States that make good skis, such as poplar. So wood core, very important to Meier and very important to our eco-friendly materials and messaging. Another thing we do, if you see some of the skis behind me, happen to have the Wildcat ski here, coincidentally, maybe not so coincidental, but we use less ink in all of our skis. We love the natural beauty of the wood. So while we have graphics on the wood, we do have some ink. We use a lot less ink. Usually about 50% of the skis would be covered in ink. And ink, I grew up in a town where there was a factory there that had many chemicals, and ink was one of the things that was produced there. And it's generally speaking, not traditionally very environmentally friendly products. So using less of that is helpful. And we like showing off the natural beauty of the wood, natural color and grains of the wood and workmanship. And it kind of reinforces what we stand for. We also use, all skis use epoxies and resins, and most are carbon-based, but we chose from the very beginning to use plant-based resins, bio-based resins, and it works fantastic. And so we've stuck with that. It costs more to use that, but we think it's just another measured, meaningful step that we can take in our manufacturing process to make a more eco-friendly ski. And then last year we introduced that outdoor retailer. It was canceled this year due to COVID, just like about everything else. Seems like where large gatherings come together, but it's the big annual industry event. And most all ski brands, they might not be, if any of your skiers and snowboards boarders, when you go to a ski shop, most of the skis will already have taken this single-use plastic off. And virtually, there's millions of skis and snowboards made every year. Almost all of them are wrapped in this. We were doing the same thing. And one time we spent all morning wrapping, 50 skis or something like that. We head up to one of the mountains here in Colorado, get up there. And within about 10 minutes of getting there, all the skis that we just delivered, they ripped all this off and we're throwing it away. And we said, well, this seems like a waste of time, money, and it's obviously not very environmentally friendly. You can't recycle it. So what can we do? We decided, since we have very durable materials on the skis, that we just move to something a lot more simple. So we use this recyclable material in the way of a ski band. So we just wrap that around the tips and tails of the skis, because really all you're doing is trying to keep the skis together. And very simple change. And so, we've made it and our customers love it. The ski shops we work with love it. And hopefully the larger brands will follow and, stop using the single-use plastic. And then what else can we do? I think there's a lot of things we can do. People talk to us about using materials such as hemp or basalt. There's a lot of materials out there, but while we want to be eco-friendly, the skis have to be fun, snowboards have to be fun, and we're not willing to sacrifice performance. So you're always looking for that balance between performance and the materials that we select and use. We are exploring for this year using perhaps some more US-based materials. Some of the materials we use come out of Europe. Skiing was largely born out of Europe, so there are some suppliers with very specific materials that we can only source in Europe. We've been working with some material providers here in the United States to see if we can replicate some of the material here in the US instead of having to go to Europe for that. And this year, we're also looking at trying to, we pay a utility bill every month, and we'd like to be carbon neutral here. We don't have known this building, so it's not really possible for us to put solar on the roof, even though we get 300 days of sun here a year in Denver. But we do have the ability to pay a bit more to try and offset and make sure that the energy that we are using to run all our machinery to heat the building gets us to carbon neutral from an energy use standpoint. So these are things that we're looking at, and it kind of never ends, and I don't think it ever will. And so while we're not a huge company, we're one of the largest manufacturers of skis in North America and continue to grow at a pretty rapid pace. So we think it's important for us to take meaningful steps and be thoughtful for kind of the environment that we all love and enjoy and recreate in. And so that's kind of our mission, is to continue to make great skis, great product that brings a lot of fun and puts a smile on people's faces, and doing so in a way that is more sustainable. I think that's it on my end.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump off from there and ask a question from our audience. And that is, you've done a lot of innovative small changes that are going to have a huge impact. But what do you see are the responsibilities of those in the industry, manufacturers like yourself, resorts, et cetera, to help combat this climate issue?
I think that the larger older than dirt brands that everyone knows about in the industry, I think there's a number of them that absolutely have taken meaningful steps and really were founded with the idea of being good stewards of the environment. I think on the manufacturing front, it's a bit of a challenge in the hard goods world. And I feel like the industry has the talking part down, but I feel like the actual meaningful steps behind the talking leave a lot to be desired. And it might just be difficult for a larger company to pivot and change their philosophy, change their mindset to do things differently. I do think it's the smaller brands that are driving a lot of the innovation on this front. And at some point, I feel like it will probably pull the larger brands along, in what we think is the right direction. But there needs to be more steps that are meaningful, more action, and less talk and less greenwashing.
Thank you. I'm going to jump off there, and Liz, I have some questions for you as well. But Ted, do you think it's difficult for young entrepreneurs who want to enter this industry with the strain of climate change?
I think it's a difficult industry for a young entrepreneur, period. It's not inexpensive to get involved in the industry, and I think there's a lot more to it than what initially one might think is involved in getting involved in the industry. I think there's opportunity, right? I mean, when I think of young entrepreneurs, I think of people that have very open minds, and they're not myopic in their thinking, and so I think there's actually opportunity there, right? Look at what the problems are at a more holistic level and try and figure out clever ways to do a better job for the industry, for the environment, and for the consumer. So I think I'm certain there's challenges, period, but I think it always creates those obstacles, create innovation.
Thank you. All right, Liz. So I have an interesting question here, and I think our audience will be very interested in your answer. What are the efforts to force China and India to comply with carbon emission standards?
This is a great question. Well, I answered a little bit. Someone had asked a similar question in the chat, so I'll kind of reiterate what I had said in there, which is essentially that you really don't need to twist their arm. China is currently leading in solar energy, and they're aiming to be carbon neutral by 2060. So there's really no way to force them to comply. They're already starting to comply. They're still the largest emitters of carbon dioxide, but they're working on a trajectory to become much more renewable energy focused and carbon neutral. India also has set ambitious targets for this. They've looked at targets about, I think it's 227 gigawatts by next year, which is alarmingly fast. And this is ahead of the Paris Agreement targets that they had set. So they're actually accelerating in terms of their ability to get towards carbon neutral targets in a way that we kind of need to catch up. And it makes good business sense to do that. I mean, for an economy, the future is renewables. The future is solar and wind. And we're not going to be seeing these companies hanging on, countries hanging on to fossil fuels when it becomes much more expensive to use them. It's a great question.
Thank you. And then I thought this was a really interesting question. I guess the question would be, is there a negative impact, or how negatively do resort snowmaking operations impact climate change?
Yeah, it's a tough situation because resorts are needing to make snow because it helps them open earlier. It helps at the bottom line, but it also emits CO2 if you're consuming energy, especially when that source of energy is coming from a grid that's powered by fossil fuels. So it's a bit of a catch-22 there. If you want to reduce your emissions, though, some of these resorts are putting solar panels up to offset their to offset the consumption of fossil fuels. Although some of them are buying carbon credits, which isn't a perfect system, but it's better than nothing. And I think the technology has also just gotten so much more efficient. You can cover much more of a mountain using much less energy, a fraction of the amount of water, and do it in a really fast amount of time and cover so much more area that snowmaking in general isn't really necessarily the worst of their problems. It is an adaptation strategy. It does produce fossil fuel emissions and contributes to the climate problem. Relative to other sectors, though, like transportation, it's tiny. So I wouldn't say that they are causing global warming per se, contributing on a small level, but they have an opportunity to do a lot more and make sure that the resorts are using renewable energy. And I think it's up to the states as well. Right now, there's not much incentivization in the state of New Hampshire to put solar panels on your resort lodge. And that's a really, really big area for improvement that we can be working on right now.
Great, thank you. Ted, I've got two questions for you. They're similar. So this is about your skis. When your skis life has ended, I guess this is for any ski, when your skis life have ended, can any of it be recycled or any of the material repurposed? It's a good question.
Good question. I actually had a call earlier this year. Someone called and said they wanted a biodegradable ski, so that when they're done with a useful life, that it would be biodegradable. And we don't have that. I don't know anyone that does at this point, but it'd be nice if it were. So right now, I mean, honestly, if you could see in here, I guess I could point this up. Our ceiling is covered in skis. So we use them for just about anything we can. Shot skis, believe it or not, are a significant use of an old ski. But as far as being able to reuse the material somehow, Unfortunately, we haven't found that, and that would be a place where I think the industry should band together and find a use for old skis. I mean, most people have them in the corner of the garage, and they can point to the skis that they had when they were in grade school and keep them throughout. I know a ton of people that have a massive ski boneyard in their garage or closet or what have you. But the problem is that there's so many different materials that are all together. And so it makes it very difficult to reuse that material. I do think it would be wonderful if the industry or a specific company was able to figure out a way to truly use all of the old skis that people have out there that ultimately go into retirement.
And then a follow-up question to that is, from the perspective of environmental impact, is it better to buy custom skis versus mass-produced skis?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question to answer. I think it would, I mean, the majority of mass-produced skis are made in either China or Eastern Europe. There are certainly a good number made in Western Europe as well. I think it depends on that particular company or that particular factory where they're being made and what their methods and processes are. It's funny, our tagline is handmade skis from Colorado trees. At least that's our tagline at the moment, maybe changing. But funny enough, even in mass-produced factories, there's still a ton of hands-on in producing skis. I mean, there's a lot of machinery, but in the end, when people are bringing all the components and materials together in what we call the layup and pressing process, it's typically people. So I don't know that I have a perfect answer there. It would probably depend on the factory and that particular company, where the skis are coming from. I mean, what's the carbon footprint to have the skis shipped from, China to the States, landed in the States? I know that we try and take very measured steps. It's hard to know what some of the mass-produced factories that make skis exactly, where they stand.
Thank you for that. All right, Liz, as the scientist, here we go. Here's the big question. How much of the changing climate can you attribute to being man-made versus natural?
This is a great question, and it's a really key question to answer, especially for folks that understand that climate has changed in the past. It absolutely has. We've had ice ages in the past. We've had warm periods when dinosaurs were in the world, and we had tropical locations that were now moving around. In terms of like what we've seen since the 1970s, much of that warming is due to human emissions of greenhouse gases. So over the course of a generation, it has caught up to us in a big way. I have a graphic that helps with that, but I'm not going to pull it up right now. But we can look at basically what scientists do when they're looking for this is they're looking for fingerprints. And when you find the fingerprints that match that warming trend, that rise since the 1950s, you're onto something. And we've eliminated a lot of other fingerprints, right? So we have the fingerprints of, say, volcanoes. They emit CO2, right? But they emit a fraction of what humans emit. It's actually pretty tiny. And in the short term, they actually have a really strong cooling effect because when they explode, they put sulfate aerosols up into the atmosphere, and those block the sun. I mean, this is kind of what really helped kill the dinosaurs besides the asteroid impact. But having a cold climate can be related to a volcanic eruption. We can also look at stuff like solar cycles, the change in the solar output. So the sun's energy output changes on about an 11-year cycle, but it explains less than 10% of the variability that we see in temperatures. And it certainly doesn't explain the warming that we've seen in the last 30 to 40, 50 years. So these are the ways that scientists can look at it. And right now, greenhouse gases they're it. That's what's responsible for the warming that we're seeing.
So here's a kind of a follow-up question to that. It says, I commend the NSAA, ski resorts, SIA, and manufacturers for stepping up. Can renewable sources produce enough energy to replace current gasoline and diesel, auto, and truck usage? Is the energy usage and cost of the distribution factored in?
This is probably much more appropriate for someone who's an economist. I'm not an economist, but we're seeing the trade-offs start to happen right now. I mean, we're already seeing that solar prices are dropping considerably. We're already seeing that wind is huge in Texas and Nebraska. They're already transitioning. If you take a look at some work by Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, she's at Texas Tech University, and she works with folks in Texas to understand the transition between fossil fuels and wind energy. And a lot of the folks that have these oil derricks on their property, they're actually finding they're making more money by having windmills. And it makes much more financial sense to have windmills on their property.
So I just have one more for you here that is definitely along the lines of your research. Why will cutting carbon emissions reduce the temperature of the air, and how does temperature affect snowfall at altitude?
Well, carbon emissions, we're talking specifically about greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. Both of those are produced when you burn fossil fuels, and both of them trap heat. So if you stop emitting them, then you will slow the rate at which they're accumulating in the atmosphere. And natural sinks for carbon, including forests, right? Forests are taking up carbon. The ocean takes up carbon. They'll start to draw it down. And that means that we can start returning to a baseline where things are not warming nearly as much. So when we think about changes in snowfall at altitude, there is a bit of a complex relationship here. So a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. And when you have more moisture in the atmosphere, as long as it's below freezing, you will get snow. If it starts to get above freezing, that's when problems arise and we start having rain on snow events or more winter rain. So the higher up in elevation you are, the more likely that will fall as snow, because it typically gets colder the higher up in elevation you are. And when we think about places like ski resorts that are at higher elevations, they're probably going to be more resilient. Places like Colorado are probably going to fare off a little bit better than places in the Northeast. Places in the Northeast that are in the White Mountains are going to do better than places in the Southern Appalachians like Pennsylvania.
It's a great question. That was a great answer. Thank you. All right, Ted. Could skiing and snowboarding face a massive identity shift in the next 10 to 20 years?
Oh boy, get out the crystal ball. I don't know that I know the answer to that one either. A lot of tough questions here. But I don't know that there's going to be a massive shift in the next 10 to 20 years. I do think, the industry is joined at the hip with snow. That's not debatable. So I guess it will, depend a bit. What we get for snow over the next 10 to 20 years. A massive shift in the next, decade or two. Probably not. Beyond that, though, who knows? I'd say it's anybody's guess, but the industry absolutely does better when there is snow, and when there's more snow, it does better yet. When there's less snow or no snow, it's a problem. And it's not just for skiing; it's for any type of snow recreation.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to end tonight with optimistic views of what we can each do. So there was a lot of questions about what can we do as individuals on a day-to-day basis to help with this issue. And this ties into this question that came in, the age-old question: how do we bridge the gap between politics and science, and then as individuals in our day-to-day life? So Liz, I'll start with you, and then Ted, I'll ask you to answer the same question.
Well, this one's a tough one. When it comes to politics, sometimes it's best to pivot from politics into specific policies and understanding what we're actually doing on the ground, and not tying one's identity to it. We are human beings. We can change. We're fluid. We can gain new information and change our opinions, and we need to be open to that. Unfortunately, there are a number of people, it's, I believe, roughly 10% of folks across the United States that sociologists have classified as what they call dismissives. You present them with any evidence of climate change, no matter how strong it is, nothing will convince them that we need to do something. they're going to dismiss it. And that's why they're called dismissives. And when it comes to folks like that, I can't do anything. I can't do anything as a scientist. What we need to focus on instead are the people who are maybe skeptical, and in a healthy skepticism way, a way that's not corrosive, one in which they're open to new suggestions and open to new data, open to new policies and exploring those. That's where we need to focus our energies. And fortunately, that's the much larger segment of the population. That's like 30 to 40% of the United States. If they're unsure about climate change, we have potential there. But the dismissives, we're going to have to leave them behind.
Thank you. Okay, Ted.
For skiers and snowboarders, snow and a big powder day is a good unifier. When people are out having fun skiing, I really don't hear people debating politics a whole lot. Maybe they are on their chairlift in their little circle, but on a powder day, it's all about having fun and smiles. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I don't care what your political beliefs are. And I say this somewhat in jest, somewhat tongue in cheek, but on a powder day, I think everyone gets along. When there's good snow, skiers and snowboarders alike all get along. So, I think it's up for individuals to do what they think is within their control to contribute it and impact in a positive way, even if it's a small step. In our industry, what we always emphasize, not just with skis, but when you're making a significant purchase, do a little research and know a little bit more about where that product came from that you're going to drop $500 or $1,000 or whatever on, and learn a little bit about that company, that brand. What do they stand for? Do they actually take some measured steps to do the right thing, or not? And I'd like to think out of all the chaos out of this past year, there'll be more people that might be a little more aware, a little more conscious when they make certain decisions, whether it's buying decisions or whatever they might be, put a little more thought into it. And, we can all probably do a bit better. And I think if everyone just does a little bit more each and every year, we'll probably all be a little bit better off for it. And hopefully we'll be skiing on powder days and on great snow for years to come. It's certainly my hope.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank our wonderful audience here with us tonight. Everybody have a great night. And as we like to say, go Cats.
Go Cats.